I was gone for 4 months. Just 4. When I came back, the land was the same. The trees, the lake, the wind. But something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you see. The kind you feel. The kind that tells you someone was here who had no right to be. I drove up the old logging road just past noon, the sun cutting hard white through the thinning spring clouds. The gravel was still half frozen from winter. Each tire crunch felt like stepping on old bones. Montana winters don't leave easy. They cling, even when the calendar says they shouldn't. The ridgeline was just where I left it, dark pines leaning against the cold sky like they'd been holding their breath. My 5-acre parcel sat quiet, still, and honest. It always did. That land wasn't just something I owned, it was something I earned, a slow-built dream. A promise I made to myself years ago. One day, I'll build a place where nobody gets to tell me how to live. And I meant it. The cabin wasn't built yet, not the real one. All I had was a portable bunkhouse, a shed, a small generator I kept wrapped under canvas to keep the snow off. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every square foot of it mine. And I had missed it more than I liked to admit. I parked near the clearing, rolled the engine down, and stepped out. The air was sharp, but not bitter. The kind of cold that wakes you, not hurts you. Somewhere out on the lake I could hear geese talking to each other, low and lazy, like they didn't have anywhere important to be. I stood there a minute, just breathing, letting the quiet work into me, but the quiet wasn't even. Something about it felt held back, as if the land was waiting to see what I'd notice first. I started toward the gate, just an old timber frame I'd set myself with a hand auger and a level that never stayed straight. It wasn't fancy, but it was strong. I remembered the sweat it took to sink those posts into rocky ground. I remembered feeling proud of it. Proud in that quiet way a man feels when he builds something with his own hands and doesn't have to say a damn word about it. But that gate? It wasn't right. The left hinge, solid steel, was bent outward like something had leaned on it hard. Not a deer, not a tree fall. Force. Heavy force. I felt my jaw clench. I didn't think it. I knew it. Someone had been on my land. The kind of someone who didn't care that it wasn't theirs. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, palm on the cool wood of that busted gate, and listened to the wind move through the pines. And I made myself a quiet promise. If someone had taken what was mine, I was going to take it back. Not by asking, not by begging, not by hoping someone else would save the day. No, I'd handle it myself, just like I always have. I unlatched what was left of the gate and pushed it open slow, listening to the metal groan. It sounded like pain, like something had been forced beyond what it was built for. The ground past the gate was torn up, scuffed dirt, crushed needles, gravel pushed out of place. Heavy tracks, wide, deep, too deep for a pickup, too sharp to be ranch equipment. No, this was machinery. Industrial. Someone brought a damn loader up here. I walked the path toward the clearing where I had stacked my logs. Step by step, something tight and sour worked its way into the back of my throat. I had spent months planning this, not just the cabin, but the source of the wood. I didn't want cheap lumberyard beams full of knots and sap pockets. I wanted lodgepole pine from high-elevation dry growth, straight, strong, patient wood. Wood that didn't warp when the seasons changed. I found a mill in Kalispell that would cut to my specs. Not just cut, mark, because I'm a careful man. Each log had a burned serial stamp right into the end grain. A small H followed by 5 numbers. Nothing fancy, just enough to say, "This is mine. I paid for it. I claimed it." I remembered the smell of the burn when they marked the first one. Pine sap, sweet and smoky, curling into the cold air. Felt good. Felt right. Those logs weren't just building material. They were the start of something I'd waited a long time for. And then I reached the clearing, and there was nothing. Just a raw, barren pad of crushed gravel, still level, still square, still waiting for a cabin that would now take a hell of a lot longer to exist. I stood there, not moving, not speaking, not breathing for a second. The space where the logs had been was wrong, like seeing a smile missing teeth. The ground told the story clearly if you knew how to read it. I kneeled down and pressed my hand against the earth, cold, dry, solid, but the impressions were fresh. The loader hadn't just come in, it had come in recently. The tracks were angled just slightly toward the tree line where I'd widened a turn path last fall. Someone had used that exact path to load the logs onto a flatbed, which meant whoever did this knew the layout, knew my access points, knew how to get in and get out without getting stuck. Not random, not desperate, calculated. My fingertips brushed across the gravel platform, and I noticed something small caught between two stones. A sliver of pine, curled, fresh, not weathered. One of my logs must have scraped as they lifted it. I held that splinter between my thumb and forefinger. It was nothing, and it was everything. My jaw tightened. I could feel the pulse in my temples now. A slow, heavy drum. Someone didn't just take lumber. They took time. They took work. They took pieces of my life I earned hour by hour, dollar by dollar, year by damn year. Where the logs had been stacked, I could still see the pattern of their weight on the gravel, a faint outline, like chalk around a body. I swallowed once, hard. Then I turned to the side of the bunkhouse where I had installed the two motion-triggered trail cameras, and I froze. The cameras were still there, but the junction box they fed into, the box I had weather-sealed myself, hung open like a dead thing. The wires were clipped clean, straight cut, no fray, no chew marks, wire cutters, precision, purpose. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't scared of being caught. I didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't throw anything. That comes later, when the adrenaline spills past the point of holding. But right now, I was cold. Ice cold. I stood up slow, walked back to my truck, opened the door, sat down, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Then I called the sheriff's department. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke calmly. Too calmly, maybe. "My name is Holmes. Parcel 14B, East Ridge. I'm reporting a theft. A large one. No, not tools. Timber. 40 logs. Cut, milled, marked, and delivered. Yes, I have proof of purchase. Yes, I'll wait." When I hung up, I stared out at the empty clearing, and I said, quiet enough the wind almost took it, "Whoever took from me, they think I'll just let it lie." I smiled then, but there was no kindness in it. They're about to learn who I am. The deputy showed up a little under 2 hours later. That's fast for our county. Fast enough to tell me they didn't think I was some drunk calling about missing firewood. His cruiser rolled up slow, cautious, tires whispering on the gravel. He stepped out, shut the door gently, like the air around us was something that could crack. He was young, younger than I expected, maybe late 20s. Face a little worn, but not by age, by life coming faster than he had prepared for. He introduced himself as Deputy Collins, steady voice, firm handshake, not the kind of man trying to prove something, just doing his job. "Walk me through it," he said. So I did. We walked the property. I pointed out the loader tracks, the gravel pad, the splinter, the cut camera wires. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush, didn't feed me any polite nonsense. He just listened. When we got to the junction box, he crouched down and touched the clipped ends with the back of his finger. "Clean cut," he said. "Yeah," I answered. "That's not vandalism." "No," I said. "It isn't." He stood up, looked out over the clearing the way I had when I first found it, noticing the absence, noticing the quiet, the wrongness. "You said 40 logs, lodge pole, milled?" "Yes." "You said each one marked?" "Yes." "Serial burned?" "That's right." He wrote it all down, slow and neat. Then he let out a long breath, not frustrated, just real. "You know," he said, "out here, when something gets taken, most times it stays gone." I looked at him, not angry, just steady. "Not this time." He held my stare for a second, and something passed between us. Not friendship, not understanding, just the shared knowledge of how hard things can be. He walked the perimeter again, taking pictures with his department-issued phone, bent down, measured the tire depth with his pen. I could see him doing the math, weight, load, tread width. He wasn't careless, he wasn't lazy, he was just limited. No cameras, no traffic lights, no neighbors in shouting distance. Just pine, road, sky, a thief's paradise. He closed his notebook. "I'll file this today," he said, "but I want to be straight with you. Without a plate, a sighting, or a witness, it's going to be slow." "Slow is fine," I said. "I'm not in a hurry. I just don't quit." His mouth twitched like he almost smiled, but didn't. We shook hands. He headed back toward his cruiser, then stopped, turned. "You said you left in late December?" Yes. And came back now? Today. He nodded. Then, whoever did this knew your schedule, or knew you weren't around. They weren't guessing, they were certain. That settled in my chest like a stone. Someone was watching my land. Someone knew when to strike. He gave a short nod, then drove off, gravel spitting under his tires. I stood there long after he was gone, listening to the wind again. The silence still wrong, the clearing still empty, the gate still broken, and I realized something important. This wasn't some random theft. This was intentional, precise, confident, which meant whoever took my timber believed they could get away with it. And maybe, just maybe, they'd done something like this before. I looked out across the lake, jaw tight, breath controlled. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd accept the loss. They thought I was like everyone else they'd pushed around. They were wrong. Very wrong. 3 days passed. 3 quiet, heavy, waiting days. I spent them sorting receipts, verifying order logs, checking my old drone footage, walking the property over and over again, just to burn the reality of it into my mind so there could never be any question about what had been there and what had been taken. I didn't sleep much, didn't talk much. Didn't leave the property, except for fuel and coffee. It wasn't grief. Grief is soft. This was something sharper. By the 4th morning, the snowmelt had turned the dirt road to a soft mud. I was nursing the last inch of my thermos coffee when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Mail truck. I don't get much mail up there, not unless I order something. So when the mail lady handed me a single white envelope, I felt the cold even before I looked at it. The return address said Willow Bluffs Homeowners Association. Willow Bluffs, 3 miles southeast. A place I had no business with, no ties to, no obligations under. If you've ever lived in the country, you know how those communities are. Vinyl siding and freshly paved walking paths. Imported rules packaged like neighborhood values. Golf carts pretending to be peacekeepers of the suburban frontier. Not my world. Not my people. I opened the envelope with my thumb. The letter inside was typed. Clean, dry, no wasted words. Dear property holder, you are hereby notified that the lumber stored on your parcel is considered unlawfully harvested from the protected forested slope east of Willow Bluffs. Said timber has been reclaimed and reassigned for community benefit pending environmental review. Further legal steps may follow. I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not shock, not confusion, recognition. They weren't just calling me a thief. They were saying they had the right to come onto my land, take what I owned, and tell me I owed them gratitude for it. I laughed. Not the kind of laugh you share, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep and old. I leaned against the hood of my truck and laughed until the laughter wasn't funny anymore, until it shook into something else. Anger, yes, but beneath it, something colder, steadier. This wasn't ignorance or mistake. This was strategy. They weren't defending nature. They were building a story where I was the villain and they were the righteous. And they counted on me to fold, to be reasonable, to let it go. I stared at the letter a long while, the wind flapping the paper edges just slightly. Then I crumpled it in my hand, and the sound it made felt like snapping bone. I got in my truck and drove. Not fast, not reckless, just straight, 3 miles east. Willow Bluffs rose up like a suburban mirage. Trim lawns, white fences, fake lake reflecting a sky too clean for how dirty the intentions underneath it were. Their community center sat at the far end of the cul-de-sac, a big beige box pretending to be important. As I parked, I noticed how the people walking by looked at me, not afraid, not curious, dismissive, like they already knew the story of me, like they had heard things. That's when it hit. The letter wasn't the beginning, it was the middle. They'd already told everyone who I was, already framed the narrative, already painted me as the problem. This wasn't theft. This was erasure. Erase the logs. Erase the truth. Erase the autonomy of a man who didn't want to belong to their rules. I stood outside the community center doors, breathing slow, letting the cold Montana air fill my lungs and steady my hands. If I walked in angry, I'd lose. If I walked in loud, I'd confirm their story. So I let it settle, let my pulse calm, let the silence return to something I could use. Then I opened the door and walked into the lion's den. The community center smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee. The kind of place built for potlucks, committee sign-ups, and speeches nobody listens to. A folding table near the door had a tray of sugar cookies shaped like little pine trees. I walked past them without slowing. The meeting room was already half full. Chairs arranged in neat rows, all facing a plastic podium up front. The walls were beige, always beige in places like this. Beige is a color that says, don't stand out, don't speak too loudly, fit in. I didn't take a seat. I stood in the back, boots planted on the linoleum, arms crossed loosely. I wasn't hiding, I wasn't posturing. I just wanted them, all of them, to see me, to feel my presence. Heads turned like a wave moving through a wheat field. Some recognized me, some pretended not to, some looked away too fast, and then she walked in. Karen Stonewell, mid-50s, blazer a little too tight in the shoulders, hair sprayed stiff into a perfect helmet, smile bright, polished, and completely empty behind the eyes. The kind of smile that says, I'm in charge, and I enjoy it. She clicked her heels across the floor and stepped up to the podium, tapped the microphone with a half chuckle that said she'd done this many, many times. Good afternoon, everyone, she began, all warmth and community charm. Thank you for being here for our monthly Willow Bluffs Association meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge a guest in attendance today, Mr. Holmes. She gestured in my direction. Every head turned again, but I didn't move, didn't nod, didn't give them anything. Karen smiled like she had just caught a wild animal and planned to tame it in front of an audience. As many of you know, she continued, there has been a misunderstanding regarding timber found near our protected east slope. Our environmental subcommittee has already documented the damage and retrieved the wood for evaluation. Retrieve, evaluate, such soft, polite words for steel. They always hide violence in polite language. She clicked a button, and a slideshow flickered to life behind her. Grainy photos of pine slopes, close-ups of bark, a blurry shot of stacked lumber I recognized instantly. Those were my logs, moved, stored, handled, used. Seeing them on that projection felt like someone pointing at a limb they'd taken from me and asking the room whether it looked better on them instead. Karen's voice rolled on. Now, to clarify, Mr. Holmes's property borders the forested slope area, and while boundary maps can be confusing, we believe the lumber was sourced illegally and stored on his parcel to conceal the activity. I pushed off the wall and stepped forward. Not fast, not angry, just steady. Every row shifted as I moved closer, like they were leaning out of the path of something they suddenly weren't so sure about. I stopped 3 feet from the podium. My land, I said, voice calm, is half a mile from that slope, across a creek with no crossing. You can't haul logs across that creek without leaving drag marks, skid trails, stump fields, and soil disturbance. None of which exist, because I did not cut those trees. Karen smiled wider, the kind of smile that means, I've already planned to ignore everything you say. We understand this is emotional for you, she said, tone sweet enough to rot teeth, but the decision to secure the timber is final until our review is complete. I opened the folder in my hand. It was thick. Purchase order, mill ledger, serial burn mark documentation, GPS delivery record, drone image of the logs stacked neatly on my land 4 months ago. I began placing each document on the podium, not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate, paper hitting plastic. Thap, thap, thap. I could feel the room tighten. These logs, I said, were custom cut and burned with my identification mark. I have proof of delivery to my parcel. I have time-stamped footage, I have certification of origin, and I have every legal right to possess them. Karen didn't look at the documents. She didn't have to. She'd already chosen her story. Well, she said lightly, we will need time to verify these materials. Meanwhile, the lumber will remain allocated to our community center expansion project. Someone in the front row spoke without thinking. Older man, flannel shirt, voice worn like old rope. But, Karen, isn't the lumber already being used to build the new lake pavilion? The room froze around that sentence. Karen's eyes flicked to the man, sharp, warning, a cut disguised as a glance. He shut up instantly, but the damage was done. People shifted in their chairs, avoided each other's eyes, started thinking instead of listening. That was my opening. I leaned in just enough that only she in the front row could hear me. "You didn't misunderstand," I said quietly. "You didn't make a mistake. You got caught." Karen didn't break her smile, but the muscles in her jaw twitched, just once. And that's when I knew. She was afraid of something, not of me, of what would happen if the truth reached daylight. I stood up straight and stepped back. "I'll see you soon," I said. Not a threat, a promise. And I walked out. I didn't need the last word. I already had it. The air outside the community center felt different when I stepped out. Thinner somehow. Like the walls inside had been holding pressure, and now it was all bleeding off into the cold. I walked toward my truck without looking back. I didn't need to see their faces. I could feel them. Eyes full of judgment, discomfort, or something worse, belief in someone else's version of me. I was reaching for the driver's door when a voice behind me spoke, slow, rough, like gravel under boots. "You handled that better than most." I turned. A man leaned against the hood of an old blue Chevy that had more rust than paint. He was maybe mid-60s, bald on top, gray around the jaw. Denim jacket faded from years, not fashion. Cigarette in one hand, lighter in the other, but he hadn't bothered to light it yet. He didn't look like someone who attended HOA meetings. He looked like someone who tolerated them. He nodded once, just enough to show respect, but not enough to pretend friendliness. "Name's Howard," he said. "Holmes." He already knew that. He flicked the cigarette between his fingers, but didn't smoke it. Maybe he just liked the feel of it there. "You're not the first," he said. That got my attention. Karen's been running this place a long time. Board rolls over when she tells it to. Folks here treat the bylaws like scripture, and she... He paused. "Well, she writes the scripture." I didn't say anything. The wind made small ripples in the fake lake behind the houses. Everything here felt manufactured, pleasant in the way a picture frame is pleasant, until you notice it's holding something that wasn't chosen by you. "She ever try to take something from you?" I asked. Howard's jaw tightened. A muscle pulled once near his temple. "She took my landline." I waited. He looked at me then, and there was something behind his eyes that hadn't died, even after years of being stepped on. I had 5 acres on the west boundary, not part of the HOA when I bought it. Karen found a loophole. Drew a district map, voted it through in a closed meeting. Woke up one day, and I was paying dues to people I never asked to represent me. "What did you do?" "I fought," he said. 3 years, hearings, appeals, lawyer bills, and you know how it ended? I didn't answer. "I sold," he said simply. "Below value. They built a trail system through it 2 seasons later and put up a donation plaque with Karen's name on it." Silence, not heavy, just honest. He flicked the cigarette again, still not lighting it. "But you," he said, eyes on me now, "you ain't like the others." "What makes you say that?" "You didn't bend," he said. "Not even a little. Most men bend before they break. I saw your face in there. You're made of something else." I didn't feel flattered, just seen. Howard reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. But it wasn't paper, not all the way. It was thicker, glossy, printed, a map, boundary lines, property designations, survey notes. He held it out. "You're gonna need this," he said. "And maybe something else when the time comes." "What's that?" He finally lit the cigarette, drew a slow breath, let the smoke roll into the cold. "Patience," he said, "and teeth." He tapped his chest twice, gentle, like a warning, and got back into his truck. The engine coughed to life. Before he drove off, he leaned out the window and said, "Don't let her write your story. Write hers." Then he was gone, just like the quiet before a storm. I drove back to my land with Howard's words sitting heavy in the cab beside me, like he hadn't actually left. The map he'd given me lay across the passenger seat. Every road, every parcel boundary, every access easement and watershed notation printed in clean, unforgiving lines. It was a map of territory, not land, power. Karen had been drawing borders, manufacturing authority, and expanding reach the way some people expand waistlines, slowly, comfortably, so nobody notices until it's too late. But I noticed. I parked beside the gravel pad where my logs used to be and stepped out. The wind had shifted, carried the sharp bite of thawing earth and lake water. Spring was wrestling winter, and neither was ready to let go. I went inside the portable cabin and cleared the small wooden table I used as a desk, pushed aside the old coffee mug, the pencil in the chipped ceramic cup, the folded tape measure. I spread Howard's map flat. Then I began to lay out my own evidence. Purchase order, mill agreement, invoice, delivery confirmation, serial burn mark documentation, GPS route of the truck that delivered the logs, drone stills from the morning after delivery, photos I'd taken myself. Piece by piece, I built a wall of truth across that table. No theatrics, no drama, just proof. Something you can place your hand on. I didn't work fast, I worked right, because I knew now. This wasn't just a theft. This was a legal war. You don't win those with anger. You win those with accuracy. By late afternoon, the table was full and my thermos was empty. I picked up my phone and looked through the county directory. There are a lot of lawyers in Montana, but only a few who understand land, timber rights, and the special kind of rot that forms inside HOA power structures. The name I needed, I already knew. Julia Canwell, Bozeman. People talk about her the way ranchers talk about winter storms, not fondly, but respectfully. She didn't answer when I called. She didn't need to. I left a message with 5 sentences. My name is Holmes. 40 lodgepole logs stolen from my property. HOA is claiming environmental seizure. I have documentation and serial marking. I need representation. 10 minutes later, she called back. Her voice was clean, precise, and sharper than barbed wire in January. Bring everything, she said. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. She hung up without another word, which was fine. I respected efficiency. That night, the wind kicked up hard, rattling the siding of the cabin and bending tree limbs in slow arcs. Karma wasn't in the picture yet, not for a few more chapters of this story, but I remember wishing I had a dog then. Something alive that understood silence the way I did. I didn't sleep, not because of fear, because my mind was awake in the way it only wakes when something matters. Bozeman was gray the next morning, late winter clouds flattening the sky into one long sheet of dull steel, the kind of day where nothing has color until you look closely enough to find it. Julia's office was above a bakery. The smell of yeast and warm bread rose up the stairwell. Felt strange, stepping into a legal battlefield with the smell of something comforting at my seek. Her office was the opposite of Karen's community center. No decoration meant to impress, no bland neutrality, just wood shelves lined with thick books, cases, depositions, a window overlooking Main Street, a desk big enough to mean business but not big enough to show off. She didn't shake my hand. Not out of rudeness, out of focus. Show me, she said. So I did. I laid out each piece of evidence the same way I had on my cabin table. Slow, deliberate, measured. She didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't comment, just watched. Her eyes moved like a surveyor's transit, measuring angles, distances, relationships. When I finished, she sat back. Serial burn mark? She asked. Yes. That's good. She tapped the mill contract. Contract specifies custom production. Very good. Tapped the GPS log. Irrefutable. Tapped the drone image. Clean chain of proof. Then she looked up at me and her voice shifted, just slightly. They didn't steal lumber, she said. They committed unlawful seizure, trespass, conversion of private property, and, depending on intent, possibly racketeering. I didn't smile, but something inside me exhaled for the first time in days. Can we beat them? I asked. She didn't blink. We're not going to beat them, she said. We're going to bury them. She began drafting the lawsuit right then, not later, not after more meetings. Right there, while I sat across from her, her pen moved like a scalpel. Holmes v. Willow Bluffs Homeowners Association. Holmes v. Karen Stonewell, individually. 2 cases, not 1. She explained it without looking up. We're going after the HOA for theft. We're going after Karen for the lie. Her tone wasn't emotional. It was precise. Like she'd done this before. Like she'd won before. When she finished the first draft, she slid a form toward me. Emergency injunction to stop construction, she said. I signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Julia handed me a card. No flourish, no ceremony. From here on out, she said, you don't speak to them. You don't respond. You don't threaten. You don't negotiate. I don't break, I said. She nodded. I know. I walked out of her office and back into the cold. The bakery smell followed me down the stairs. Warmth behind me, war in front of me. The land waited, and I was ready to fight. You always hear about the first punch in a fight. It's ugly and loud and leaves a bruise you can point to. What they don't tell you is about the second and third punches that land when you're already trying to breathe. The ones that come from paper and bureaucracy and other people's belief in their own little empires. Within 48 hours of filing the injunction, the first wave came. An email from my insurer, short, clinical. We are unable to process your claim at this time due to pending third-party seizure claims. They attached a scanned copy of Willow Bluff's environmental report, stamped with the HOA letterhead and a notation, seized for protection, pending review. I opened the PDF and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't even good. A few paragraphs of vague language, a shaky photo of an incline with a circle drawn around a patch, no GPS coordinates, no certified timber inspector signature, no chain of custody, nothing. Someone had photocopied a half-remembered thought and handed it a badge. But whoever wrote it wasn't trying to write convincing science. They were writing a story. This is theirs. We are saviors. He is suspect. The insurance company used those 3 words, pending third-party seizure, like a cudgel. And the company's legal department, who had once returned my calls in 3 days, now required a mountain of paperwork before they'd even think about proving coverage. The paperwork was endless. Forms with more boxes than meaning, requests for sworn statements, for certified copies, for appraisals, for valuations. They wanted receipts, photos, serial numbers, which I had, but in the wrong format, then in the right format, then notarized again. It felt like being made to run in circles in a storm. I handed everything over, twice, thrice. I called, I emailed. I got polite responses that implied they were on my side and deeply sorry, and that they would process my case as soon as the pending seizure was resolved. Translation: we'll pay when someone else decides to stop lying. The second punch came via postal mail, a certified letter from Willow Bluff's attorney, tone polite, language stiff. It alleged that the HOA had reason to believe the timber was unlawfully harvested from protected slopes, that they had acted in the community's best interest, and that any pursuit of the property would be vigorously defended. They closed by reminding me that false claims and harassment could result in sanctions. A threat, thinly wrapped as propriety. I read it twice. Then I read it again, because the last line had that lawyer's habit of including a deadline for a response, always a threat disguised as a courtesy. I felt anger, sure, but the deeper feeling that settled was exhaustion. The third punch was quieter but more bitter. The county planner called. "Mr. Holmes," she said in a voice that tried to be neutral and failed, "we received a complaint about unauthorized timber storage near Willow Bluffs. Until this is sorted, we've placed a temporary hold on any construction permits linked to that parcel. No permit, no building, no progress. The cabin project, which had felt so close when I'd ordered the wood, sat like a promise with the thread cut. That night I sat at the little table in the bunkhouse and looked at the documents spread out like battlefield maps. Every piece of paper had a line. Every line stood between me and the thing I planned to build. They had turned the simple fact of ownership into 1,000 tiny stops, delays, denials, polite refusals. I could feel the weight. I called Julia. She picked up on the second ring. "We knew they'd fight," she said. "Of course they did. They'll try to starve you out. They'll try to make the practical costs impossible. That's how these things work." "It's working," I said. There was a pause, full of the sound of a lawyer thinking in straight lines that go where they go. "Not if we make it more expensive for them to keep this up than it is to stop." She didn't sound hopeful. She sounded tactical. I liked that. "How?" I asked. "We escalate," she said. "We file for expedited discovery. We subpoena records. We force them to produce their internal communications. And we make their actions visible. The press will like the villain with veneers if we bring the receipts." Visibility was an odd kind of weapon. It didn't sound romantic, but it was practical. Lights expose rot. People in suits don't like being looked at closely. I slept poorly that night, a thin blanket of fitful, jumpy sleep. Dreams of hands moving my logs, of men in hoodies loading beams at dusk, waking and checking the door like a fool. In the morning, I drove into town. Equipment stores, county offices, the courthouse steps. I filed another affidavit, gave another recorded statement. I posted a version of events, careful and clean, to a local forum that Julia recommended. Not accusations, facts. Purchase order, dates, photos, drone stills. Within hours, a thread started that would turn into a small but loud echo. A neighbor from 3 miles over posted, asking if anyone had seen heavy equipment moving in the nights last month. A woman claimed her contractor had been offered cheap timber with no paperwork. A whistleblower message appeared in my inbox from someone who said they worked at a contractor's yard and that there were logs with odd branding coming through late at night. The swell came slowly. Not enough to fix my insurance, not enough to build my cabin tomorrow, but enough to change the tone of the fight. When I finally drove home that evening, the sky was a bruise of low clouds. The gravel road splashed up mud. I parked, climbed out, walked to the pad, and knelt where the logs had been stacked. I touched the stone-cold earth and let it hum in my palm. They had hit me where it hurts. Practical life, daily progress, quiet plans. They had tried, for a time, to make me look foolish and broke and alone. But the parts they could not buy were stubborn. Documentation, stubbornness, and the slow human habit of telling the truth out loud. The fight had cost me sleep, paper, and patience, but not my resolve. I stood up. My shoulders felt heavier, but steadier. If they wanted a war of attrition, they'd get one, and I wasn't going anywhere. There's a point in every fight where you realize you're done playing defense. Not because you feel strong, not because you're winning, but because you finally understand what the other side is afraid of. Karen wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of the sheriff. She wasn't afraid of lawyers or paperwork. She was afraid of eyes. Eyes on what she'd done. Eyes on what she'd built. Eyes on the cracks in her perfect little kingdom. So I stopped trying to solve this quietly. I went public. Not loud, not angry, not dramatic, just documented. I posted to a land management forum first. Just facts. 40 lodgepole logs. Purchased legally. Custom milled. Serial burn mark. H21974, H21975, H21976, GPS proof of delivery, photos of my clearing before winter, photos of the empty pad after, the letter from the HOA claiming seizure, and a question. Has anyone in Gallatin County seen equipment transporting unmarked timber in the last 60 days? No accusations, no story, just reality. Then I posted the same to a local Facebook group. Then to Reddit's RR Montana. By sundown, I had 20 replies. By midnight, I had 200. And by the next morning, I had something far more valuable. People talking. Folks came out of the woodwork. A rancher said she'd seen a flatbed going past her property at 3 a.m. in January. A guy in Belgrade posted a blurry phone video of a loader on the highway with logs that looked too uniform to be wild harvested. A former Willow Bluffs resident, anonymous account, said Karen had reclassified private fences as community structures to fine people into moving. But the message that stopped me came just after sunrise. No name, no greeting, just a file icon and 5 words. You'll want to see this. It was a set of photos, 12 of them, taken from a distance across Willow Bluffs' model home demonstration lake. In every photo, men were working on the new lakeside pavilion the HOA had been boasting about all winter. The beams they were installing, lodgepole pine, clean cut, tapered, matched. And on the end of one beam, zoomed, grainy, but clear enough that it knocked the breath out of me, H21974, my mark, my hand, my signature in fire, right there, held on someone else's land, like a trophy taken from a kill. I didn't yell. Didn't throw anything, didn't break. I went still. Still the way water goes still before it freezes. Still like the world holds its breath. Because now I had the truth. Not my truth. Not a story. Not an accusation. Photographic evidence. I sent all 12 images to Julia. She called me less than a minute later. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, it sharpened. "This is enough," she said. "We request emergency enforcement today. The sheriff will accompany us." There was no triumph in her tone, no excitement, just cold, clear momentum. I drove to meet her. Same cabin, same desk, same receipts laid out like armor. Except now, we had the sword. The sheriff met us at County Hall, Not Deputy Collins. This time, Detective Marla Kenny herself. She walked with the kind of confidence earned from telling the truth in rooms that didn't want to hear it. She shook my hand once. "We have grounds," she said. "I'll walk the site with you. But understand something. When we go in, there's no taking it back. No quiet resolution, no shaking hands after." "I don't want quiet," I said. "Not anymore." She nodded once. Agreement, recognition, not partnership, not friendship, just two people facing the same direction. We drove in separate vehicles, unhurried. No sirens, no spectacle, the kind of approach that makes guilt sweat. When Willow Bluffs came into view, the sky shifted gray, clouds cutting sunlight into cold streaks. People walked along the sidewalk with dogs and strollers and smiles that didn't reach their eyes when they saw us. The pavilion site was by the artificial lake. Just like in the photos, fresh lumber, fresh concrete, workers hammering and measuring. We walked up, calm, steady. One foreman looked over, puzzled. Another looked nervous. A third froze when he saw Detective Kenny's badge. And then Karen arrived. Hair perfect, smile perfect, voice sugar-sweet and venom-dipped. "Detective Kenny," she said, like greeting a neighbor at a bake sale, "what brings you out here today?" Detective Kenny didn't waste a breath. "We're performing a court-ordered verification of property seizure and material origin. Step aside." Karen laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, detective, this is a misunderstanding. That lumber is ours, clearly." I didn't say a word. I just stepped forward, placed my hand on the end grain of the nearest support beam, and brushed away a bit of sawdust with my thumb. H21974 burned dark into the wood. Silence broke like glass. Karen's smile didn't fall. Her face just stopped knowing how to hold itself. Detective Kenny spoke first. "Construction is halted, effective immediately." Workers put down tools, some stepped back, some looked relieved. And I said, quiet enough for only her to hear, "You didn't just steal lumber, you stole time, and you thought no one would notice." Karen didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The construction site went still, the way a forest goes still when a predator steps out of the brush. Quiet, immediate, absolute. Hammers lowered, voices cut off mid-sentence. The workers didn't look confused, not really, just caught in the gravity of someone else's wrongdoing. People always know when they're standing too close to the truth. Detective Kenny motioned to one of the deputies who had accompanied her. He began photographing the serial burn mark on the beam, each shot methodical and precise. The way a person works when they understand the evidence they are collecting is not just documentation, it's history being carved in real time. Karen watched the camera shutter click with a tight smile that didn't belong to a confident woman. It belonged to someone rehearsing composure to avoid drowning. "That mark doesn't prove anything," she said. Her voice was strained at the edges, still sweet, still poised, but thinner now, like the frost in March, visible, but melting if you look long enough. The logs were harvested improperly from the protected slope. We reclaimed them. They were already in violation. Detective Kenny turned to her with the slow, calm weariness of someone who has heard every lie that exists at least twice. "Ms. Stonewell," she said, "we have the original purchase contract, shipping manifest, GPS route logs from the hauler, time-stamped photographs, and recorded statements from the mill foreman confirming the serial branding. You may call it reclamation. I call it seizure, without authority." Karen held her smile, but the skin around her eyes tightened. She was out of script. I didn't speak, not yet. This was a moment for truth, not noise. The foreman, broad-shouldered, weathered, with a beard that probably used to be red before life turned it gray, stepped forward, rubbing his hands together. He looked from Detective Kenny to Karen, then to me. "We didn't know," he said, voice low. "We were just told the HOA had purchased reclaimed timbers from conservation recovery. We thought this was all above board." I nodded once. No anger, no blame. Workers rarely know whose war they're building with their hands. "It's not on you," I said. He exhaled, shoulders eased. His crew glanced at each other, some embarrassed, some relieved, some just ready to go home. Karen snapped toward him, her composure cracking like ice under boot. "You don't speak to him," she hissed. But the foreman had already stepped away from her shadow. He wasn't hers anymore. That was the first fracture. I watched it happen in real time, not loud, not theatrical, just a shift, power leaving one body and returning to its rightful center. Detective Kenny lifted a clipboard and handed Karen a sheet of paper. "This is the temporary injunction," she said. "Any continued construction is now in violation of a court order. Additionally, the materials matching the serial documentation are subject to immediate seizure and held as evidence." "What does that even mean?" Karen snapped, her voice finally cracking. "It means," Kenny said, slow and even, "you don't get to touch this lumber anymore." Karen took one step forward, pointing a stiff, trembling hand toward me. "He planned this. He is manipulating this entire situation to damage this community," I finally spoke. My voice didn't rise, not once. "Karen, if I wanted to damage this community, I would have stayed quiet and let you finish this pavilion. Let it stand there like a monument to your theft. Let everyone gather under it. And then one day, when the truth came out, they would remember who built it and what it was built from." Her mouth opened, but there were no words, because there was no defense that could stand against the truth of proof. You can argue feelings, you can argue intentions, but you cannot argue branding iron burned into timber. The workers began packing up tools. The pavilion sat half skeleton, half corpse, caught mid-breath between built and unbuilt, a thing that would now never become what they envisioned. Detective Kenny turned to me. "We'll transport and tag a sample set, enough to prove material match. The rest stays here until the court finalizes disposition." I nodded, but I was looking at Karen. She was calculating, hard. Her mind was moving fast, the gears grinding under stress. She wasn't the type to collapse here. She was the type to retreat, regroup, and strike from another angle. That's when her son arrived. Tall, maybe 30. Expensive work boots never scuffed. Construction vest that looked like it had been ironed. A jaw that had never known the satisfaction of biting down before throwing a punch. He was the kind of man who inherited stakes he didn't earn. He walked straight to Karen, eyes on me the whole time. "What's going on?" he asked. But it wasn't a real question. It was a demand. Karen leaned in, whispering, but whispers have a way of carrying when guilt is in the room. "He's accusing us," she said. No, I wasn't accusing anything. I was proving. He stepped forward, too close, trying to loom. I didn't move. He looked down at me. "You think you're going to win this?" I finally looked up at him, not like a threat, not like a challenge, just like a man who has stood taller things. "I don't think," I said. "I know." He blinked once. Confusion, not fear yet. That would come later. He opened his mouth again, something about lawyers, countersuits, damage to reputation. I didn't let him finish. I simply lifted my hand and pointed, not at him, not at Karen, at the beam, at H21974. Silence swallowed everything. A silence you don't talk your way out of. A silence that knows things. He stepped back, not much, just enough. And that was the second fracture. Karen grabbed his arm, tight. He pulled away. The third fracture, the structure of power that had held this place together for years, was beginning to come apart. Not with a bang, with truth, slowly, relentlessly, wearing through deceit like water through stone. Detective Kenny finished her documentation. Her deputy tagged the beams. The foreman signed statements confirming their discovery. Everything was done clean, legal, not triumphant, just right. When it was over, I turned to leave. Karen called out behind me, voice sharp, desperate, almost shrill. "You think this is finished?" I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. "No," I said. "It's just begun." And then I walked away, boots steady on the gravel, cold wind cutting across the lake, the half-built pavilion standing behind me like a monument to the moment truth finally stepped into the light. The Gallatin County Courthouse doesn't look like much from the outside. Red brick, narrow steps, windows that haven't been washed since winter. But courtrooms don't need grand architecture to change the course of people's lives. They just need doors that close behind you. The morning of the hearing was cold enough that you could see your breath, but not so cold it stung. A transition day. Winter leaving, spring trying its luck. I drove in before sunrise, parked in the gravel overflow lot, and sat for a moment with the engine off. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was calm. I wasn't walking into something unknown. I knew exactly what waited on the other side of those courthouse doors. Truth. And truth doesn't need to hurry. Julia arrived a few minutes later. Slate gray suit, hair pulled back, eyes clear and focused. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She already knew. "We don't need to win their approval," she said as we walked toward the steps. "We only need to show the facts." "That's all I have," I said. "That's all we need." Inside, the courtroom was already half full, not with supporters, not with enemies, just people, curious, cautious, waiting to see which story would hold. Karen sat at the defendant's table wearing a dark navy suit and a smile more fragile than the last time I saw it. Her son sat beside her, jaw tight, like he still believed this was salvageable if he just scowled hard enough. Her lawyer was tall, polished, and overconfident, the kind of man who believed tone mattered more than truth. He looked at me once, dismissively, and then didn't look again. That was his first mistake. Judge Rayner entered, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of posture that said he had spent his life listening more than speaking. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and began. "Let's hear the plaintiff." Julia stood. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't posture. She didn't sell anything. She simply presented. Purchase contracts, mill invoices, serial burn documentation, GPS route logs, drone images. My photographs, the emergency injunction, each piece laid out like stones across a river, crossable, step by step, no leap of belief required. Then came the photos from the pavilion, the serial number, burned, visible, undeniable. For the first time, Karen didn't look like a queen. She looked like someone realizing the floor beneath her was not a floor. The defense lawyer tried to challenge the photos, claiming chain of custody issues, claiming misidentification, claiming potential damage or alteration. Julia waited for him to finish. She didn't argue. She simply called Detective Marla Kenny to the stand. Marla spoke the way only someone with nothing to prove speaks. Clear, simple, direct. She confirmed the site inspection. She confirmed the seizure. She confirmed the match of serial burn marks. She confirmed the quality of the mill records. She confirmed the cut camera wires. She confirmed the tire impressions. And then she said the sentence that broke the back of the defense. "There is no evidence whatsoever that the plaintiff harvested timber from the Willow Bluff slope. But there is direct and documented evidence that the HOA removed timber from his property." Silence washed the room clean. Then came the internal messages, Howard's quiet gift, the Slack export. Julia projected them on the screen, one line at a time. "We can't let him build that cabin. If he finishes, the non-HOA parcels will push back. Logs have been moved. Keep the story consistent. Environmental angle works." Karen's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting, citing privacy, improper sourcing, authenticity. Judge Rayner lifted a hand, just one. "Sit," he said. The lawyer sat. Karen stared at the screen, hands folded tight enough that her knuckles turned white. For the first time since this started, she looked smaller, not weak, just human. Her son shifted in his seat, jaw flexing, breath fast. The first cracks of realization forming behind his eyes. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a paperwork error. This was theft, coordinated and deliberate. Julia finished with one simple sentence. The plaintiff did not lose lumber. He lost time. He lost trust. He lost the right to build his home in peace. And the defendants took those things without remorse. No theatrics, no anger, no flourish, just truth. The defense lawyer stood and began talking, words smooth, practiced, hollow. He spoke of community benefit, administrative confusion, overlapping boundaries, good intentions. He spoke for 13 minutes. No one remembered a single sentence, because everyone in that room had seen the brand mark. They'd seen the message logs. They'd heard the detective. They knew. Judge Rayner adjusted his glasses and spoke with the weight of someone who has no interest in being dramatic. "I find in favor of the plaintiff." Karen exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was collapse. The judge continued. "The HOA acted outside its authority. The seizure was unlawful. Restitution will be paid. The construction project is halted indefinitely. And the defendant, Ms. Stonewell, will face separate criminal proceedings." The gavel sounded. A single, sharp strike. The kind of sound that ends chapters. Karen didn't look at me. Her son did. Not with hatred, with understanding of consequences. The kind that arrives slow, then all at once. Julia closed her folder, not triumphant, just done. We walked out of the courthouse to a gray morning that felt a little lighter than before. As we reached the steps, she stopped and looked at me. "You didn't win because you fought hard," she said. You won because you refused to lie. I nodded. I wasn't smiling. But I could breathe again. The snow melted for real in April, not the false melts, the ones winter takes back just to remind you who's still in charge, but the real thaw. The kind that softens the ground and brings the smell of wet pine and cold soil. That was when the new logs arrived. Same mill, same cut, same lodgepole pine from high ground, same serial burn marks, my mark, earned, not argued. I was there when the truck backed up to the gravel pad. The driver, older guy with a sun-creased face, hopped down from the cab and looked at me like he already knew the story. He just nodded once. I nodded back. No words needed. You don't talk much around lumber, you just handle it. I rented a solar camera system this time, motion-triggered floodlights, alerts to my phone, backup battery for cloudy days. Not because I was scared, but because the land deserved better than to be stolen from again. I also adopted a dog from the shelter in Bozeman. Big, mixed-breed mutt with a rough coat and a bark that carried. They said his name was Pete. I renamed him Karma, because sometimes the universe needs help remembering who owes what. Karma followed me everywhere, through the clearing, into the shed, around the fire pit. He slept by the logs like he understood exactly what they meant. Maybe he did. The cabin didn't rise all at once. Nothing worth building does. First week, foundation piers and the slope grade. Second week, sill beams and the first course. Third week, the corners, notched and fitted. Slow work, honest work. Neighbors, real neighbors, not HOA types, stopped by sometimes with beer, pie, or another pair of hands. No one asked for anything. No one told me how it should look. They just helped where help was needed. That's community. Not a rule book, not a committee, just people. Summer grew up around us. The lake went clear, geese brought goslings, and the ridgeline glowed gold in the late evenings. The cabin frame took shape, roof beams, rafters, decking underfoot that reminded me with every step. This is mine, not because I bought it, because I built it. When the walls were up and the roof sealed and the windows framed, I saved one piece of the work for last, the center beam over the fireplace. I sanded its surface smooth, brushed away dust, lit the wood-burning iron until it glowed the same kind of orange I remembered from the mill. And I carved the sentence slow, steady, letter by letter. Not every HOA knows who they're messing with. I stepped back when I finished. Karma lifted his head and barked once, sharp and sure, like punctuation. I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I just stood there and let the quiet of my land hold me. The same clearing where something had been taken, the same clearing where something had now been restored. The cabin wasn't just a structure, it was a statement. I didn't win because the law protected me. I won because I didn't walk away. And that's the part they never expect. Not the punch, not the evidence, not the case. The staying, the not bending, the not letting someone else write your story. I built my home, and I live in it. That's the end of the fight, and the start of something better.